Hey, we are here. We are rolling. We're ready to get going. I hear something coming over the speaker, and I'm making the adjustment. And I'm finding my seat. Okay. Hey, what we're going to do today is we have a testimony from, let me see, from Luke. Okay, so yeah, the doctor is in the house. Okay. For those of you who don't know, Luke is a doctor in the scripture. But and then after the testimony, what we'll do is we have for kids, and we flew in a special teacher for the kids. Wow. You'll know who it is when they walk out. Okay, hey, that's great. And then we got a message today that's really going to challenge us on one side, and on the other side, it's going to lift us up, right? And as long as like on the final turn, it's on one of those ones that are going up, right? You know, it's I don't know. I like to be challenged. When I read the Bible, I get challenged. You ever get challenged reading the Bible? You know, you need to hate your mother, your brother. It's like, what? You know, and it's so important to know the language, because in that it's like, hey, just make priorities right, and God's worthy of it all. We sang the song, right? I mean, and he's worthy of it all, and he's just saying have it in the right place. But he always tells us to love one another as he has loved us. So we have that kind of love. Just have a good priority, have God first. And I see you here, so you're actually putting that into action. You know, so that's great. So, I was going to say a couple, but a trio has landed in Medellin and has been here now for close to a few months, and just really been enjoying their portion and things that God has done in their life and the history. And one of those parts is right over here. That's Vanessa. Okay, Vanessa, I really love Vanessa. She's always really quiet during the service, you know, and then Joy's the one. No, it's yeah. So that's a subtle. Okay, but have just really been appreciating Luke and Alexandra as they've, you know, They love to show up for things, evangelism, and usually if there's food, you can count on them being there. Hallelujah. And they bring things, and wow, just everything. So I've asked Luke if he would share just a testimony of his. Now, I want to make this clear that there's two kinds of testimonies. There's one testimony that is like what's been going on in your life. What has God been doing? He's brought you to something. Maybe you've just recently had like this phenomenal experience with God, and then the pastor asks you, hey, could you share a testimony about that? So that doesn't mean you do 20 minutes of, where God brought you to that place, right? So that's a testimony of the present and how things are going. But then we have like a testimony in our life, like, wow, I was on this journey. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I had some light, but then I realized I didn't. And then, boy, the Lord stepped into my life. Man, haven't looked back. I've fallen down. I've done or whatever, but the Lord came in my life, and so that's a beautiful testimony of our salvation. And so I've asked Luke if he would share that today.
How's everyone doing?
Yeah, pretty good.
How far? Can you hear me like this? Yeah? Don't need to shout. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Luke. I'm from England. My wife over at the back there is Alexandra from Colombia via Germany. My daughter over there hiding is also from England, half English, half Colombian. I grew up in the UK. and I'm really blessed to say I grew up in an amazing Christian family, really loving parents. They brought me up in the church, and I think for probably the first 10 years everything was going great. I was always a little bit mischievous. I like to go out and do sort of naughty things and whatnot, but nothing bad, just normal kid stuff, like setting trees on fire and things like that. And then had some family trauma. A couple of things happened, and I think a big thing happened for me was going to high school. I went to a pretty bad high school, and through some of the trauma and things that happened just before that, I think I started to, become cold. I became callous, and I was going to this a very tough school, and none of my friends were in church. And I think at the time I was looking for role models, and so I was looking in the church around me for strong men. And unfortunately at that time I couldn't find any. So around me they were just kind of very wishy-washy men who didn't really have much to say about God. They would come because their wife, I think, would drag them along, and they would rather be watching the football. Football's obviously a big thing in England. The football that you kick with your foot, not carry in your hands. And so this is what I grew up around. And my grandfather was a strong man, but he wasn't a Christian at all. He was into boxing, so I really gravitated to him when I was a young teenager. And then in school, I think I started to get into more problems, and I got kicked out of school. And I was starting to feel like there wasn't really much hope. So there was this theme developing in my life at this time where I couldn't really see any hope for myself, and I couldn't really see any future. It looked very dark. You imagine being in a tunnel and just seeing darkness. And I was looking for a light at the end of the tunnel, but I couldn't see any light. So I think I went into college. After that point, I managed to scrape my way into college. And then I just started making some other friends, and they were really into drinking and drugs. And so I was starting to, fill the void inside myself with the alcohol and drugs. And that gave me like a false sense of confidence. So when I was high, when I was drunk, I felt more confident. I could kind of shut down my emotions and put all the stuff in the past to one side. But I just got used to doing this. So there became a point when I left college, I did some construction work, and I just was, every day I could not wait to get high and get drunk. And the weekends for me were my favorite because I could do it for like 3 days straight. And by the time, the end of the month came, even when I got paid, I think it was a couple of days later, I had no money left. I was already burnt out. So it got to the point where I think I was like 19, 20, and I was really, going full tilt. I had a house at that point. Really bizarre that I even had a house. But I had a house. I was living with my best friend, and we called it the party house because there was always people there. It was always a party. I didn't even know most of the people there. And I would just turn up from work. There'd be new people there. We would all be doing drugs together, all be getting drunk. And it was just a very dark time. And I had some spiritual encounters then. I still had this like very vague belief of God. But I was like, God's over here. I'm going to pursue like happiness and try and find meaning in life. And, he's there. And maybe one day I'll come back to him when there's nothing else that I can find that can fill that void. So I was really looking for meaning and purpose, but I was, every time I went to the club, it wasn't there. I could almost touch something, but it was out of reach. So I kept on pursuing. I kept on looking, and I figured the more I go after it, the more maybe I'll find it, but I never did. And so I think it was when I was 20, I just had a pretty major breakup, and everything was just unraveling. I just really couldn't function without being high and drunk. And so my parents at the time said, listen, we think the best thing for you would be to leave and go to a different country, like as far away as possible. So we looked on the map. Australia was pretty far. So we said, why don't we book a ticket there? So I booked the ticket, and I said, I'm going to go on a working visa, and I'm going to reinvent myself. I can pretend to be someone new who hasn't done anything wrong and who's a good person. So I went over to Australia, and I did 6 weeks on a farm in complete isolation, and I was kind of a decent person for a while. But then someone invited me to go to Sydney for Christmas, and it started again. And there was 2 months of just absolute like mayhem. I can't really remember much. Like 2 months of my life just completely blank, honestly. And it got to the point where I had burnt through all my friendships at that time, all my money, all my resources. and I was really in the worst place possible. And I remember I'd done 3 days straight of partying. Like, you imagine 3 days of getting up, or somehow not even really waking up, just kind of going from the nightclub to some restaurant or something to eat just to fuel up, and then back to the nightclub, and then back again. And it got to the point where I remember coming out of a nightclub. I didn't know what day it was. It was light, so I think it was about 7 a.m. in the morning. I think that was the third day. And I just had this thing in me where I said, I've had enough. I've hit the wall. I'm checking out. Like, I was like, how do I get out of this? And the only way I could think about it was, kill myself. And so that's where I was. And I remember in that moment, stood there. I was living in a red light district, so things were really good, And it was just like, that's where I'd arrived. I was living in this red light district, and there I was, just at that rock bottom. And I was, in that position where I thought, okay, I'm either going to check out today, or something's got to change today. And then I felt like God spoke to me. Now, I'd been very distant from God, but God, I think, had always been there pursuing me in any way he could. And I really remember, I felt like God said to me, are you ready now to give your life? Are you ready to submit that you've got nothing? Have you figured it out yet that you've got nothing to offer yourself and that you need me? And I remember I didn't do a prayer or anything. I just stood there and was like, I surrender. That's all that I can kind of remember. And I called my mum at that point, because she was the only person, I think, who kind of could speak some sense to me. I called my mum, and she says to me, I think it was like 8 a.m. at this point in Australia, and it was about 10 p.m., I think, in the evening in the UK. And she said, it's funny that you just called me, because God told me to get on my knees and pray for your life, and that you were going to do something, to end your life. So that was like the confirmation for me that God was speaking to me and that I needed to pursue him. So she told me, you need to go to this place called Hillsong. Now, I thought that was where there was a bunch of Christian hippies. I was like, I don't even know what that means. But I went, and I walked into the church, and I just remember feeling this, like, just the love of God radiating from the back to the front of the church. And then I sat there feeling quite embarrassed, because I just was really jittery and high and tired and all this stuff. And the guy who was speaking kind of said, I have a message, but I really feel like there's a backpacker here. And he told my story. And he said, you need to give your life to God now. And I'm like, okay, I was a mess. And I put my hands up in the air. I was like, just take me. And they prayed for me. And I was like, my biggest concern was, I don't know if I'm going to screw this up again, because I always manage to do that. And then someone prayed for me, and he said, I'm believing right now God is going to deliver you of all addiction. And immediately I felt it just lift off me. And that day was 16 years and 10 months ago, and I haven't touched drugs since. Not in my own strength. This is all God. I literally could not save myself. I couldn't do anything right at that point. And I really want to focus on what God has done since then, because, everyone talks about, here's where I came from, but really what's more powerful is what God has done in me and through me since. So since he's, given me a beautiful wife and daughter, and I don't deserve them, and I'm really punching above my weight, I think another thing he's done is he gave me meaning and purpose. Like the verse I would describe, that kind of was the before and after, would have been Jeremiah 29:11. It says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, and plans to give you a hope in the future. And that's exactly what he did. Before, I had really no kind of meaning or purpose in life. I had no hope. I had no kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And afterwards, he really gave me a meaning to live. And more than that, I think he just gave me kind of a real understanding of, like, what I was looking for before I was a Christian was like real men of God. Strong men who had confidence in themselves, were strong but were also meek and loving and caring. And I've met those types of men now since through church. I've been also able to mentor other men and help them come out of themselves. So in England, where we lived for 14 years, we were able to create a men's ministry that has really sparked a bit of a movement around the world, where men can be strong men but also show the love of Jesus. And I think for me, it's been a privilege being able to mentor men that have been from all walks of life, from regular work life, very successful men, all the way to special forces in the elite armies of the world. And some of those were like some of the toughest men you'd ever meet, and they would never ever step foot in a church. But we were able to reach them. We were able to reach them where they were in the gyms. We've been to nightclubs and ministered. We've been to bars and ministered to them whilst watching boxing and things like that. And it's been amazing to see men like that. And one of them in particular, a guy called Kevin, an amazing guy, was a very, very tough guy. He'd had like an amazing past, and been an elite soldier and seen some horrific things. And I remember speaking to him when he came into church, and he said, listen, you don't know what I've done. God can't save me. And I said, listen, you don't know where I'm from. God saved me. He can save you. And we had that conversation. Now, fast forward, Kevin left the Special Forces. He's, been radically saved, got married to an amazing woman, and now is in a ministry for, what's that ministry? Rana Bonke's ministry, CFAN. So he travels around the world. He's spoken to probably hundreds of thousands of people and given the salvation message and seen people saved. So I really feel, just to kind of round up, that if anyone here is ever in that position where you feel like you haven't got a hope, you haven't got a future, and you've tried everything else, I'm telling you, your best bet would be to put all your chips on the table and put your trust in Jesus, because there is nothing else, no other religion, no other name that you can be saved. It's only Jesus Christ. So my invitation would be to you, if anyone here doesn't know Jesus Christ and you want to know him, put your faith in him today and come and pray with someone afterwards. I'll pray with you. But that would be it.